Welcome back, YouTubers, to the Evil Bad Book Club, Chapter 17 of the Turner Diaries. April 20, 1994. A beautiful day, a day of rest and peace. After a hectic week, Catherine and I drove to the mountains early this morning and spent the day walking in the woods. It was cool and bright and clear. After a picnic lunch, we made love in a little meadow under the open sky. We talked of many things, and we were both happy and carefree. The only shadow which fell upon our happiness was Catherine's complaint about the number of out-of-town trips the organization has sent me on recently. Even though I have been out of prison for less than a month, I didn't have the courage to tell her that in the future we will have even less time together. I only found that out myself yesterday when I reported to Major Williams last night after returning from Florida. He told me that I'll be traveling a lot in the next few months. I didn't get all the details from him, but he hinted that the organization is preparing for an all-out nationwide offensive this summer, and I am to be a sort of roving military engineer. But today I put that out of my mind and just enjoyed being alive and free and alone with a lovely girl in the midst of nature's beauty. As we were driving home this evening, we heard the news on the radio, which capped a perfect day. The organization hit the Israeli embassy in Washington this afternoon. No better date in the year could have been chosen for such an action. For months, an Israeli murder squad working out of their embassy has been picking off our people around the country. Today, we settled the score for the moment. We struck with heavy mortars while the Israelis were throwing a cocktail party for their obedient servants in the U.S. Senate. A number of Israeli officials had flown in for the occasion, and there must have been more than 300 people in the embassy when our 4.2-inch mortars began raining TNT and phosphorus onto their heads through the roof. The attack only lasted 2 or 3 minutes, according to news reports, but more than 40 projectiles struck the embassy, leaving nothing but a burned-out heap of wreckage, and only a handful of survivors. So, we must have had at least 2 mortars firing. That confirms what I was told last week about our new weapons acquisitions. One fascinating incident in the news story, which the censors somehow failed to cut before it was broadcast, was the murder of a group of tourists by an embassy guard. During the attack, an Israeli came running out of the crumbling building with a submachine gun, his clothing in flames. He spotted a group of a dozen tourists, all women and small children, gawking at the scene of destruction from across the street. Shrieking out his hatred in guttural Hebrew, the Jew opened fire on them, killing 9 on the spot and critically wounding 3 others. Of course, he was not charged by the police. Your day is coming, Jews. Your day is coming. I should be getting to bed early tonight in order to be ready for a long day tomorrow. But the excitement of our achievement this afternoon makes it impossible for me to sleep yet. The organization has demonstrated once again what an incomparable weapon the mortar is for guerrilla warfare. I am much more enthusiastic now about our new plan for Evanston, and will be better braced for overcoming any more bulkiness on the part of our professor in Florida. Last Saturday, when I was discussing my plan for getting radioactive material into the Evanston plant with Henry and Ed Sanders, they convinced me that a mortar could do the job better and that we are now well supplied in that department. So I redesigned the delivery package, changing it from a walking cane to a 4.2-inch mortar projectile. We will replace the phosphorus in 3 WP rounds with our radioactive contaminant. After we have zeroed in the target with conventional rounds, we'll fire our 3 modified projectiles, which will be adjusted to exactly the same weight, of course. This way of doing it has 3 advantages over my original plan. First, it is surer. There is much less chance of something going wrong. Second, we will be delivering approximately 10 times as much contaminant, and the bursting charges in the projectiles will disperse it better than anything we could hope for with a loaded walking cane. The third, it need not be a suicide mission. We can keep the hot projectiles shielded until the moment they are to be fired, so the mortar crew will not be exposed to a lethal dose of radiation. My big worry was whether we would be able to get our projectiles inside the power station instead of just on the roof. The building is so heavily constructed that I doubt that they would penetrate even with delayed action fuses. Ed Sanders convinced me, though, that once a 4.2 incher is zeroed in and firmly seated, it will deliver rounds with sufficient accuracy and a low enough trajectory so that we will have an excellent hit probability on the side of the generator building facing the shore, which is practically one huge window 10 stories high and more than 200 yards wide. Armed with this new plan, I went to talk to Harrison, our Florida chemist. I explained to him that his part of the job is to procure a suitable radioactive material and then, using his special facilities, safely load it into the mortar projectiles I will bring him. Harrison had a fit. He complained that he had only offered to supply the organization with small quantities of radionuclides and other hard-to-obtain materials. He did not want to become involved in actually handling any ordnance, and he especially objected to the quantity of material required by our plan. Not many people in the country have access to so much radioactive material, and he is afraid it will be traced to him. I tried reasoning with him. I explained that if we try to load the projectiles ourselves without the shielding handling facilities he has, one or more of our people will surely be exposed to a lethal dose of radiation. And I told him that he is free to choose a radionuclide or a mixture of radionuclides which will cast the least suspicion on him, so long as it is suitable for our purpose. But he flatly refused. "It's out of the question," he said. "I would jeopardize my entire career." "Dr. Harrison," I replied, "I am afraid you do not understand the situation. We are at war. The future of our race depends upon the outcome of this war. As a member of the organization, you are obliged to put your responsibility to our common effort ahead of all personal considerations. You are subject to the organization's discipline." Harrison turned white and began stammering, but I continued relentlessly. "If you continue to refuse my request, I am prepared to kill you on the spot." As a matter of fact, I was unarmed because I had flown down on a commercial airliner, but Harrison didn't know that. He swallowed a couple times, found his voice, and said he will do what he can. We went over our figures and our requirements again and settled on an appropriate timetable. Before I left, I assured Harrison that if he feels this operation will place him in too much jeopardy to continue as illegal, we can bring him underground after it is completed. He is obviously still very nervous and unhappy, but I don't think he will try to betray us. The organization has established a very high degree of credibility for its threats. Just to be on the safe side, however, we will use another courier when the time comes to drive the modified projectiles down to Florida to be loaded and brought back. No technical knowledge is required for that. I don't like to act like a tough guy and threaten people. That is an unnatural role for me. But I have very little sympathy for people like Harrison, and I am sure that if he had not agreed to cooperate, I would have leaped on him and strangled him with my bare hands. I guess there are a lot of other people who think they are playing it smart by looking out for themselves and letting us take all the risks and do all the dirty work. They figure that they will reap the benefit with us if we win. And they won't lose anything if we lose. That's the way it has been in most other wars and revolutions, but I don't believe it will work out that way this time. Our attitude is that those who only concern is to enjoy life in these times of trial for our race do not deserve life. Let them die. In the conduct of this war, we certainly will not concern ourselves with looking out for their welfare. More and more, it will be a case of either being for us all the way or against us. April 25. Off to New York tomorrow for at least a week. Several things cooking up there which require my attention. The business down in Florida should have been taken care of by the time I return. And if so, it'll be another trip to Chicago for me, this time by car. The Yids are really screaming about the attack on their embassy. They are giving far more emphasis in the news media to this attack than they did to either the attack on the Capitol or the bombing of the FBI building. Each day on TV it gets worse, with more and more of the old gas chamber propaganda that has worked so well for them in the past. They are really pulling their hair and rending their garments. Oy vey, how we are suffering, how we are persecuted. Why did you let it happen to us? Weren't 6 million enough? What an act of outraged innocence. They are so good at it that they almost have me weeping along with them. But strangely, there has not been another mention of the murder of those 9 tourists by the Israeli guard. Ah, well, they were only Gentiles. One unexpected benefit to us from the embassy action has been a major quarrel between the blacks and their Jewish patrons. Purely by coincidence, the attack came 3 days before the date which had been set for a nationwide strike for equality, another of those giant media affairs to be stage managed by the Human Relations Councils, in which spontaneous demonstrations were to be held simultaneously in a number of large cities, with black and white citizens joining together in a call for the government to break down the last of the barriers between the races and assure the blacks of full equality. But then last Thursday, the day after we hit the Israelis, the big boys in the councils, Jews of course, called it all off. They decided they can't afford to share the media spotlight with the blacks until they have finished milking their own martyrdom in the embassy raid for all it's worth. A few of the more militant black leaders who spent a long time working on the preparation for the equality strike didn't see it that way. They have long resented the high-handed way in which the Jews manipulate and exploit the entire equality movement for their own ends, and this was the last straw for some of them. There were angry accusations and counter-accusations, which culminated Saturday in the Jews' #1 house nigger, the nominal chairman of the National Association of Human Relation Councils, giving a press interview at which he denounced his Jewish masters. From now on, he said, the Human Relation Councils will not recognize the Jewish claim to minority status. They will be treated just like the white majority and will no longer be exempt from investigation and punishment for racism. He was out on his ear before he knew what happened, of course, and his place has been taken by a better spoken, housebroken black, but the fat is already in the fire. On the streets, the roving bands of black deputies have gotten the word, and woe betide any member of the self-chosen tribe who falls into their hands. Several have already died while being questioned, just in the last 2 days. The Toms will eventually get their more militant and resentful brethren back into line. But meanwhile, Izzy and Sambo are really at one another's throats, tooth and nail, and it is a joy to behold. May 6th. It's nice to be home again, even if only for a day. But New York was interesting. I saw more ordnance up there than I ever imagined we'd have at our disposal. One of our specialized units in New York has been acquiring military material of all sorts and stockpiling it. The purpose of my visit was to survey the types of military gadgets available which might be useful to me in designing and building special weapons and sabotage devices, so that I can make recommendations for further procurement priorities. I was met at the airport by a girl who drove me to a wholesale plumbing supply store in an incredibly filthy industrial warehouse area in Queens near the East River. Garbage, old newspapers, and empty liquor bottles were strewn all over. We had to navigate around the stripped and rusting hulks of several abandoned autos, which nearly blocked the narrow street before the girl finally pulled into a small, muddy parking area behind a tall chain-link fence. She knocked at a steel door marked "Employees Only," and we were quickly admitted to a gloomy, dusty storeroom filled with bins of pipe fittings. There she turned me over to a cheerful young man about 25 years old, dressed in greasy coveralls and carrying a clipboard. He introduced himself as Richard and offered me a cup of coffee from a disreputable-looking electric urn at one end of a long counter near the door. Then we took a old and rickety freight elevator to the second floor of the building. When we stepped out of the elevator, I gasped in surprise. In a huge, low-ceilinged room, more than 100 feet on a side, there were immense heaps of every sort of military weaponry imaginable. Automatic rifles, machine guns, flamethrowers, mortars, and literally thousands of cases of ammunition, hand grenades, explosives, detonators, boosters, and spare parts. I don't know how the floor supported it all. In one corner of the room, 4 men and a woman worked at 2 long benches under fluorescent lights. One man was grinding the serial numbers off automatic rifles, which he took one at a time from a stack of approximately 50, while the others oiled and reassembled the rifles and then carefully packed them inside a large hot water heater from which the top had been removed. I saw a dozen large cartons nearby which contained other water heaters. "That's the way we store and ship weapons," Richard explained. "We remove the serial numbers just to make it harder for the authorities to figure out where we're getting the stuff, in case they ever find any of it, And once the water heaters leave here, there's no way they can be traced back to us. The phony shipping tags we put on the cartons are coded to tell us what the contents are. You'll find that our rather special water heaters have been installed in the headquarters of quite a few of our combat units along the East Coast, but we ship them everywhere in the country. Almost in a daze, I wandered among the heaps of weaponry. I stopped beside a ceiling high stacked of large olive drab crates. Stenciled on each crate were the words mortar, 4.2 inch, M30 complete. And under that, gross weight 700 pounds. Where did you get these? I asked. I remembered all the work we had done a year and a half ago, modifying just one mortar of ancient vintage. Those came in last week from Fort Dix, Richard answered. The people in one of our units just outside of Trenton paid a black supply sergeant on the base $10,000 to swipe a truck with those things on it and deliver it to them. Then they brought them up here 2 at a time in the back of a pickup. We received material here from more than a dozen bases and arsenals in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Look what we got last month from Picatinny Arsenal, he said, throwing back a tarp covering a nearby stack of cylindrical objects. I leaned over to examine them. They were fiberboard tubes about 2 feet long and 5 inches in diameter. Each one contained an M329 high explosive mortar projectile. There must have been at least 300 of them in that one pile. Richard continued his explanation. It used to be that most of our new weapons were smuggled off military bases one at a time by our own people who were stationed there. But lately we've switched to hiring black service personnel to hijack the stuff for us by the truckload. We don't always get exactly what we want that way, but we get a lot more of it. We've set up a couple of phony fronts posing as mafia buyers for the illegal weapons exporting business. Our people on the bases steer the buyers to blacks in charge of the weapon storage areas. For enough money, they'll walk off with the whole base for us. They just have to share some of the money we give them with a few of their soul brothers on guard duty. There are several advantages for us. First, it's easier for the blacks to swipe the stuff without getting caught. The political police aren't watching them as closely as they are the white service personnel, and the blacks already have organized networks on all the bases for siphoning off and selling tires, gasoline, PX supplies, and other things for which there is a civilian demand. And it allows our people in the service to concentrate on their main task, which is recruiting other white servicemen and building our strength inside the military. I spent the rest of the day going through everything in the room and mentally cataloging it. When I left, I took samples of a couple dozen different types of high explosive fuses, igniters, and other odds and ends I wanted to experiment with, which meant I had to come back on the train. The situation in the military is double-edged. With more than 40% blacks in the Army and nearly that many in the other services, morale, discipline, and efficiency are shockingly low. That makes it enormously easier for us to steal weapons and also to recruit, especially among the career personnel who resent what has been done to their services. But it also poses a fearful danger in the long run, because the day will come when we must make our move inside the military. With so many blacks under arms, there is bound to be a bloody shambles. While we are cleaning out the blacks and reorganizing the services the country will be virtually defenseless. Well, I guess it has been planned that way. Hey, and that's it for chapter 17. Come back tonight for the breakdown, and then tomorrow for chapter 18. And I'll check you YouTubers out later.